They never expected it. Not from someone like you. Not this level of clarity. Not this kind of silence that shakes the ground beneath them. You weren't supposed to rise. You weren't supposed to survive their plans. But you did more than survive. You reversed the entire current. You flipped their entire operation inside out. The very traps they set for you, they walked into them. The very chaos they tried to drown you in, you stood still in it, untouched. And it drove them mad. Because the truth is, you didn't just escape their grip. You humiliated their strategy. They've spent years in the dark, crafting illusions, weaving webs, whispering lies with smiles, convincing others you'd fall apart. But instead, you became the storm they never saw coming. You didn't use force. You didn't even raise your voice. You simply stood firm. And that alone exposed how weak their entire structure really was. That's the part that haunts them. See, being chosen doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like not reacting. And sometimes it looks like standing alone while their fake empires crumble. And now, their minds replay the moment they lost you over and over. The power you carry isn't loud, but it's lethal. It's the kind of power that doesn't just destroy enemies, it reveals them to themselves. If you felt this shift, if you know you're one of the ones who were never meant to fit in, but always meant to change everything, then this message is for you. Stay sharp, stay silent, stay chosen. If this message lit something inside you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and continue building with us. You're not alone, you're just getting started. Before moving ahead, let me pause and speak to the hearts of those who've supported this mission through Super Thanks. Your generosity isn't just a contribution, it's a reflection of alignment, a signal that your spirit recognizes the weight of this message. In a world where darkness often masks itself in power, your act of giving is more than support. It's a declaration that you stand on the side of truth, of clarity, of divine purpose. You didn't just help a video. You helped push light deeper into places where manipulation once ruled. And because of you, those who walk this path no longer walk it alone. If this message stirred something within you, if the silence of your strength, the victory of your stillness, and the exposure of their false power speaks to your journey, take a quiet moment right now and affirm it, not for show, not out of pressure, but as a sacred agreement between you and your purpose. Comment 999 below, not as a number, but as a seal, a sign that you are chosen, that you've seen the game, stood your ground, and now walk with clarity no shadow can touch. This is alignment, this is purpose, and this is only the beginning. Number 1, don't mistake their crowd for strength. One focused soul can collapse an entire system. They thought their chaos would confuse you, that if they twisted reality enough, you'd forget who you were. But they underestimated the power of silence, the strength in stillness, and the clarity that comes from a mind not clouded by fear. You didn't react. You didn't panic. While they scrambled to cast shadows and throw illusions your way, you simply stood still. And that alone started to collapse everything they built. They couldn't understand how someone could walk alone and still walk stronger than all of them combined. They had numbers, they had rehearsed chants and crafted theatrics, but what they didn't have was you. They fed off fear. Confusion was their fuel, division was their tactic, and when none of that worked, they unraveled like threads pulled from a cheap disguise. Their greatest weapon wasn't power, it was distraction. But what happens when you don't flinch? When you stay locked into your mission, unshaken? That's when their whole system collapses on itself. Because the truth is, when your mind is focused, it becomes a blade. One edge cuts through manipulation, the other cuts through illusion. That's what you did. You didn't just resist, you revealed. You showed them what real power looks like, clarity under fire. And here's what breaks them the most. Your energy didn't come from any crowd, any ritual, or any external thing. It came from within. While they leaned on each other like crutches, thinking that their unity made them strong, you were the one who stood alone and exposed how weak they really were. False unity always breaks under pressure. What looks like strength in a group can often be just shared fear. But when you stood your ground, the illusion shattered. The whispers stopped, the rituals faltered, and their many couldn't handle your one. They tried everything: noise, confusion, intimidation. But what defeated them was what they never prepared for: stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't shake, the kind that doesn't seek attention, the kind that holds its ground while the storm burns itself out. You didn't scream. You didn't chant. You didn't fight the way they expected. You simply let their chaos collapse around your calm. And that's what made you victorious. Not the volume, not the might, but the clarity of someone who refuses to be pulled off their path. You didn't just win. You dismantled everything they depended on. One focused soul will always be more powerful than 1,000 screaming in confusion. And that truth, it haunts them now. Number 2, break the cycle before it binds you. They didn't just come for you. They came with the weight of generations behind them. You weren't up against a person. You were standing face to face with a cycle, a pattern passed down like an heirloom, soaked in fear, control, and silence. They thought you'd fold like the others did. They thought history would repeat itself. But history didn't expect you. See, when you're chosen, your fight is never just about the now. You're the wall that stands between what was and what will never be again. The pain that once moved quietly through bloodlines, masked as tradition or power, met its end the moment it touched your spirit. Because you didn't just resist, you refused to inherit what wasn't yours to carry. They called it legacy. You saw it for what it was: a chain, a long-standing system of control that disguised itself as culture, pride, and even protection. But you didn't fall for the illusion. You looked the past in the eye, called it out for what it was, and snapped the thread so tight it echoed back through generations. That moment wasn't loud, but it was final. They wanted you to become another copy of their broken pattern. Instead, you became the glitch in their design, the end point, the one who chose awareness over autopilot, the one who said, "It ends here." And that decision, it terrified them. Because when someone breaks the cycle, it doesn't just disrupt the present, it shakes the foundation of the past. You made ancestors restless. You made manipulators panic. You did something most never had the strength to do. You didn't just survive the legacy. You refused to become it. So if you're feeling the tension, the resistance, the pressure, it's not punishment. It's confirmation. You are the turning point, the chapter they didn't want written. And every step you take forward is a step away from a darkness that thought it had no end. Number 3, stay mysterious, stay powerful. What they can't read, they can't control. They couldn't figure you out. And that's exactly why they couldn't break you. See, their entire strategy was built on predictability. They studied patterns, reactions, triggers. They were used to controlling people through calculated chaos, pulling strings, whispering doubts, setting traps. But then came you. And you didn't move the way they expected. You didn't respond with fear. You didn't engage in their noise. You went silent. And that silence, it shattered them. Because there's nothing more dangerous to manipulators than someone they can't read. You became the blank space in their blueprint, the variable they couldn't control, While they were busy trying to summon fear, you stood unmoved. While they tried to provoke you into rage or confusion, you responded with indifference. And while they scrambled to adjust their tactics, you gave them nothing. And that nothingness became everything. That's the secret power of chosen ones. We don't just survive, we confuse the very system designed to destroy us. They tried to calculate your next move, but you weren't playing by their rules. You weren't even in their game anymore. You became the ghost in their machinery, the one presence they couldn't decode, the one frequency they couldn't jam. That's what drove them mad. It wasn't just your strength, it was your unpredictability. When they can't read your energy, they can't control your path. And when they can't control your path, their plans fall apart. You became the error in their equation, the unexpected silence in the middle of their spell. They needed your reaction to feel powerful, but you gave them nothing, and that robbed them of everything. This is why your mystery is your weapon. Stay unpredictable, stay unreadable, because every time they stare into your silence trying to find weakness, all they see is the reflection of their own confusion. You didn't need to be louder, stronger, or faster. You just needed to be unreadable. And you were. Number 4, master yourself first. That's how you become the weapon they'll never see coming. They were looking for a fight. They were ready for spells, conflict, chaos, because that's the only kind of battle they understand. What they weren't ready for was someone like you. No war paint, no weapons, just a calm presence and complete mastery of self. See, you didn't need to attack them to defeat them. You became something far more dangerous, unreadable. And nothing frightens manipulators more than someone who doesn't react the way they planned. That's when they lose their script. That's when they start spiraling. You didn't show up to match their energy. You didn't flinch at their tricks. Because before you ever walked into that battlefield, you had already done the real work. The kind of work they never even thought to do. Mastery of your inner world. They searched for cracks in your armor, insecurities, desperation, confusion. But you had already faced all of those demons yourself. You didn't hide them, you confronted them, and that's why they couldn't use them. What do you do when your enemy has no buttons to push, no fears to prey on? That's when the illusion of power falls apart. They weren't fighting a victim, they were facing someone who had already been through the fire and came out shaped like steel. You weren't trying to prove anything to anyone, and that terrified them. Because once you stop seeking validation, you become unshakable. And once you stop being afraid of yourself, no one can use your past, your pain, or your fear against you. You became the weapon they didn't see coming. Not because of what you carried, but because of what you no longer carried. You were light, clean, sharp. You moved in silence, and every time they tried to strike, they hit nothing but their own shadow. That's what real power looks like. Not rage, not noise, but mastery. You didn't need armor, you became it. And now they sit in confusion, wondering how one person took them all down without even raising their voice. Number 5, never fear the mob. If their unity is built on fear, one truth will shatter it all. They always believed that if they shouted loud enough, you'd stay quiet. That if they gathered in numbers, you'd fold under the weight of their fake unity. But the truth? Numbers don't scare a chosen one, especially when those numbers are built on fear, not strength. You saw it clearly. Their so-called alliance wasn't power, it was survival. A fragile agreement between scared individuals pretending to be bold. They moved in groups, not because they were strong together, but because none of them could stand alone. You, on the other hand, didn't need a crowd. You didn't need backup. You had something they could never fake: clarity. Their fear disguised itself as confidence. Their unity masked desperation, and when you showed up without flinching, without matching their noise, everything in them started to break. They thought you'd mirror their chaos. Instead, you exposed it. What happens when one steady truth walks into a room full of liars? That's what they felt when you entered. Their circle cracked. Their whispers grew shaky. Their confidence wavered. Because the one thing they never prepared for was someone who didn't fear them. Chosen ones don't follow mobs. We dismantle them. Not with aggression, but with presence. Not by being louder, but by being unshakable. They depended on their rituals, their rehearsed performances, their echo chambers. But you brought silence. And silence reveals everything. You didn't even have to fight. Just being there was enough. One real one will always be a threat to 1,000 who are pretending. And now, their unity is in shambles. They can't trust each other, because the moment you expose their foundation, built on fear, lies, and control, it all started to collapse. Let that be your reminder. Never fear the mob. If their power is rooted in fear, then one truth, one presence like yours, is enough to shatter it all. Let's keep going. Number 6. Stop believing their time is endless. When you face the lie of immortality, it falls apart fast. They had one trick left: convincing the world that their reign would never end, that their rituals, their names, their secrets gave them some kind of eternal pass. They walked like time didn't apply to them, talked like consequences were only for the weak. They dressed up fear and called it legacy. But here's the truth they never wanted to face. Every illusion has an expiration date. And you became that expiration date. The moment you stepped into clarity, the countdown began, not just for their games, but for everything they thought made them invincible. You didn't just challenge their actions, you shattered the myth they were hiding behind. That myth of untouchability. That idea that just because they'd been doing it for generations, no one could stop it. But when you looked them in the eye, calm and unshaken, they saw it. They weren't timeless. They weren't untouchable. They were just delayed consequences in a cloak. They'd built an empire on borrowed time. And you called the debt. Because chosen ones carry something most never understand, the ability to see through what others fear to question. They thought their rituals made them gods. But when they realized they couldn't scare you, they had to face the truth. Mortality never skipped anyone. Not even them. You didn't just end a cycle, you exposed it. Their greatest fear wasn't defeat, it was being seen. And when you stood tall and unmoved, you forced them to face their expiration in real time. That's why they trembled. That's why they fell apart. They'd spent lifetimes building shadows. You brought the light. Now their illusions rot in the daylight. Their so-called immortality has cracked like glass. And you didn't just outlast them, you ended the story they thought would never close. Number 7. If you don't give fear a voice, it dies. The psychological war ends before it begins. They wanted to win before the battle ever began. That was the real strategy. Not through spells, not through force, but through fear. They whispered rumors, spread shadows, dropped just enough doubt to make you question yourself. Because fear, to them, was the sharpest weapon in their arsenal. And if they could get inside your mind first, they'd never have to lift a finger. But what they didn't expect was your silence. See, fear demands a response. It needs your attention. It needs you to believe in it. But when you ignored it, you starved it. When you refused to react, you turned their power into dust. You didn't play defense, you stood still. You didn't engage, you watched, and that shook them more than any counterattack ever could. Because psychological war isn't won through shouting or proving points. It's won through refusal. Refusing to absorb their lies. Refusing to speak on things not worthy of your voice. Refusing to hand your peace over to chaos. That is how you became untouchable. That is how you became unpredictable. Have you ever noticed how fast manipulators fall apart when you don't respond? Their strength crumbles when their tactics fall flat. Their illusion of control fades the moment they realize they don't live rent-free in your head. And that's what happened here. They thought you'd panic. Instead, you became the calm they couldn't comprehend. Your mind clear, your emotions unavailable, your presence unreadable. That's not weakness, that's power. That's psychological dominance. You didn't let fear speak, and when fear isn't fed, it dies. That was the true win. Before a move was even made, before the stage was set, you had already ended their game because you refused to participate. And now, they're scrambling, not because you attacked, but because you didn't flinch. The real ones don't always need to fight loud battles. Sometimes the greatest victories happen in the quiet, when you let them panic in their own mind while yours stays unshaken. Let's keep going. Number 8. Use their arrogance against them. The bigger their ego, the harder the fall. They were so sure of themselves, so blinded by their own image of power that they didn't stop to consider the one thing that could destroy them, their arrogance. See, they mistook your silence for weakness. Your calmness, they read it as cluelessness. They assumed you were just another easy target. And that's exactly what gave you the upper hand. Because arrogance isn't just a flaw, it's a trap. And they walked right into it. They thought you'd beg for mercy. They thought you'd panic, react, fold under pressure. But you didn't. You watched, you waited. And when they overplayed their hand, you didn't need to attack. You just let their own weight pull them down. That's what arrogance does. It builds a false throne made of ego. And the higher it gets, the harder it crashes when truth finally shows up. You didn't need to expose them. They exposed themselves. Every time they underestimated you, they revealed their weakness. Every time they bragged about their control, they showed just how desperate they were to keep it. They put on a show, and you let them. Because while they were performing, you were preparing. That's what chosen ones do. We don't compete with noise. We let noise destroy itself. Your strength wasn't in confrontation, it was in precision. You didn't attack them head-on, you let them make the first move, and when they did, it was already too late. Their plans were loud, yours were silent. Their moves were obvious, yours were internal. They thought their name, their following, their rituals made them invincible. But ego has a way of making people deaf to warning signs. They couldn't hear the sound of their own downfall beginning. And by the time they realized you weren't the one being played, but the one setting the stage, it was already over. You didn't just defeat them, you let them defeat themselves. That's the most painful kind of loss. And now they'll forever remember that it wasn't your power that ended them, it was their pride. Let's keep going. Number 9. Guard your frequency like gold. Dark energy can't touch what it can't reach. They tried. Oh, how they tried. With all their rituals, their whispers, their symbols soaked in low vibrations. They aimed straight for your mind, hoping you'd fold, hoping you'd crack. But nothing landed. Not because they weren't skilled in their craft, but because you were already operating above it. Your frequency was too high. And here's what they'll never say out loud, but feel deep in their bones. They couldn't reach you. While they chanted in circles, drawing symbols and sending intentions rooted in envy and control, you stayed still. You stayed elevated. Their dark energy, it ricocheted off you like stones against steel. And that wasn't luck. That was alignment. That was mastery. That was someone who knew how to seal their spirit. Have you ever noticed how manipulators panic when their control doesn't work? That's what you triggered. They wanted you reactive, confused, emotionally drained, but you gave them peace. Not the peaceful kind, the kind of peace that screams, "I know who I am, and your chaos isn't welcome here." They couldn't penetrate your field because your mind wasn't open to suggestion. Your heart wasn't starving for validation. Your energy wasn't sitting in low places begging to be filled. You were full, overflowing with direction, clarity, and self-trust. You see, it's not always about resisting the attack. Sometimes it's about vibrating so high that the attack loses direction, loses power, loses meaning. They had mastered fear, but you mastered self. And that mastery, it's rare. That's why you're chosen. That's why they fear you. They couldn't bend you. They couldn't reach you. And that silence, the one you held while they screamed into the void, that's the part that eats them alive. Your frequency isn't just protection. It's a shield forged in resilience and self-respect. Guard it like gold, because once they realize they can't touch you, they'll try to mimic you. And that's when their fall begins. Let's keep going. Number 10. Don't sell your soul for safety. If they can't corrupt you, they can't own you. They didn't just want to defeat you. They wanted to absorb you, to twist you, to turn your power into something they could control. But the moment they realized you couldn't be bought, bribed, or broken, that's when the panic set in. They offered you what they thought you couldn't resist: comfort, shortcuts, recognition, promises whispered in the dark, not to help you, but to tame you, to make you more manageable, more like them, because corrupting you would have been the ultimate win. But you didn't fold. You didn't sell your integrity for a safer path. You didn't trade your voice for temporary approval, and because of that, they lost control before they even started. The true battle wasn't physical, it was moral, psychological, spiritual, and you passed the test. They weren't prepared for you to survive. See, most people don't even realize when they're being bent. It doesn't always look like a threat. Sometimes it looks like comfort, like flattery, like being told you deserve more as a trap. But you knew. You saw through the bait and kept your values unshaken. And that's what made you dangerous. You became the one thing they fear most, someone they can't own, someone whose values are not up for negotiation. They can handle rebellion, they can handle confrontation, but what they can't handle is someone who simply won't play the game. You didn't reject their offers out of pride, you rejected them out of purpose, because you know exactly who you are. That inner clarity made you immune to their flattery and invincible to their control. And now they're haunted by what they couldn't change in you. Because every manipulator fears the moment they meet someone they can't manipulate. They call it defiance. But you know what it really is? Freedom. You were never theirs to shape, never theirs to guide. You didn't just say no to corruption. You made it clear you were never available for sale in the first place. And that's what sealed their defeat. Number 11. Detach from the applause. When you fight without ego, they lose all leverage. They expected you to crave recognition, to chase applause, to fight for a spotlight so they could use it to control you. That's how they trap most people. by feeding their ego just enough to lead them into a cage. But you weren't interested in applause. You weren't seeking praise. And that terrified them. They didn't know what to do with someone who didn't need to be seen to feel powerful. You weren't fighting for attention. You weren't driven by revenge. You were driven by necessity. And when a chosen one moves without ego, without attachment to how it looks, their enemies lose all leverage. They couldn't tempt you with admiration. They couldn't distract you with vanity. And they couldn't understand how someone so calm, so silent, could cause so much destruction. Because you didn't fight like them. You fought differently, quietly, purposefully. You didn't scream your wins, you made them feel them. And the more you stayed silent, the more their plans fell apart. They realized too late. Ego is what makes people predictable, and you refused to be predictable. You didn't want to impress the crowd, you wanted to dismantle the system. That's what makes you unstoppable. See, when you're not chasing validation, they can't bribe you, mock you, or manipulate you. You're not motivated by how it looks. You're moved by what must be done. And that kind of clarity, that's rare. That's dangerous. They used to win battles before they even started, because their enemies were too eager to be liked, too desperate to be praised. But when they faced you, they faced something they had no tools for. A chosen one who doesn't care about being crowned, only about completing the mission. And that's the moment they lost, not because you had more power, but because they had no way to influence someone who doesn't serve ego. Your detachment didn't make you cold, it made you pure. And that purity of intent exposed every dirty tactic they relied on. You didn't just win, you reminded them that some people cannot be bought, broken, or distracted. And when a chosen one moves like that, silent, sharp, selfless, there's no spell strong enough to stop them. Number 12, refuse to play along. Their power cracks when you hold up the mirror. They built their power on illusion. Layers of performance, manipulation, and false fear. And for the longest time, it worked. Because most people played along. Most people accepted the story, bowed to the image, and gave power to the performance. But you refused. You didn't scream, you didn't argue, you just stopped entertaining the lie. And that's what cracked their system. Because when a chosen one holds up the mirror, the game falls apart. You didn't need to expose them with words. You exposed them with truth. Your silence spoke louder than their noise. Your stillness made their theatrics look foolish. And that mirror you held up, it showed them who they really are. Without the mask, without the followers, without the smoke and chants, just raw, desperate weakness. They couldn't handle that. See, their power only worked when people agreed to pretend it was real. It only had weight because others believed in it. But you didn't. You broke the illusion by simply not reacting. And when they saw that you weren't buying it, the cracks spread fast. Have you noticed? When you stop playing their game, they panic. Because suddenly, they're not feared. They're exposed. And exposure is their greatest enemy. They thrive in shadows, but mirrors force light. And you became the mirror. They spent years perfecting control, rehearsing intimidation, building layers of fear to protect their fragile truth. But you stood calm, firm, and unbothered, and that alone tore the veil down. You didn't need to humiliate them. They did that to themselves the moment they realized you weren't scared. You weren't confused, and you weren't buying the illusion. Before we close, let this truth settle deeply. Your silence, your clarity, and your refusal to entertain the lie have already done more damage to the enemy than 1,000 words ever could. You didn't fight on their terms, and that's exactly why you won. You became the mirror, and in your reflection they saw everything they tried to hide. That's power. That's purpose. That's the mark of the chosen. If this message spoke to something real inside you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and keep standing strong. You're not alone. You're just rising.